when I got there, I don't remember quite how many physios there were, but there probably were about 6 or 7. And we had an aide there, AID, not AID, AID, yes, they were AIDs in those days, and then they had an E put on the end when AIDS came in, so that they were not quite the same as people with AIDS. And the aide would get people ready for us and get treatment cards out and keep the daily register. And the daily register was terrible. They had to be put in a column for whether they'd had massage, M, whether they had had heat, H, whether they'd had traction, T, whether they had exercises, E, and at the end of the day all the different E's and M's, etc., had to be filled in, and at the end of the week that had to be added up, and at the end of the month that had to be added up, and it all went down to the board's office, which was in a building down in town. Now, we had physios in those days were extremely fit. I'm not saying they're not fit now, but when I came, I trotted nearly all day. Now, I realise, using the word trotted, a lot of New Zealand people don't know trotting. They know trotting for horses, but they don't know trotting for people, which is you're not walking and you're not running, but you're going at a very brisk walk, which is almost a run. You trotted. And if you were on the wards, you trotted from ward to ward, and you did your patients there. And if you were in Hocken, which was medical and geriatric women, and so the medical wards were strokes and things like that, and bad chests, and you had a ward. Some of the wards at the main hospital were still long wards of 36 patients with curtains, but down in Hocken it had been built by the Americans during the war, and it was slightly more modern. You had 4 bedded cubicles, and you might have had in one cubicle somebody with a bad chest that needed postural drainage, and you might have had 2 strokes that needed exercise for their arm and their leg, and you would have had several other patients in other cubicles. Now, Hocken was done in half a day, so that meant that you went down to Hocken, which was down a steep hill. One of the earliest thing I really heard at the Waikato Hospital was the first day I went down to Hocken. I heard most wonderful 2-part singing, and I thought, oh, who's doing that singing? And it was the ward maids in Hocken Kitchen, and they were 2 Maori girls singing most beautifully. Now I'll go back to the physio. Postural drainage, you would lift the bed with the help of a nurse, no male attendants anywhere, with the help of a nurse up onto suitable blocks, and you positioned the patient to drain. You put the next patient, which was a stroke, on slings for their arm and gave them some exercises. You went to the next patient and you gave them some passive movements for their arm. Then you put that person up on a sling for their arm. You went back to the postural drainage, got up on a stool so that you could reach their chest, and gave them some vibrations and some clapping and got them to cough and spit, and you changed their position. You went back to the hemi and you changed their position. You went back to the third hemi and you changed their position. You went back to the postural drainage and you gave them some clapping, etc., changed their position. You changed the arm hemi and you gave them some passive movements and then put their leg up on sling. You went to the third hemi and put their arm on a leg. You went round like that. And then you went to another cubicle and you did that, and you trotted. And then you sort of trotted up the hill to have some lunch, and then I went into outpatients department for the afternoon. And there was nowhere for them to wait. They waited in the place they were having treatment. We did have three seats that they sat on, but they heard and saw most of the things that were going on. We did have curtains that we could divide up people, and most of the people were having shortwave and exercises and some specific massage, or they were put on the Guthrie Smith bed for resisted exercise. And it's amazing what you can do with some springs and some inner tubing, rubber inner tubing. And our weights for quads exercises and things. We did have some boots made in the splint department, and we used a lot of sash cord weights for people to hold in their hands, or we had weighted sandbags or buckets of with wet sand and things like that. We had to remember to wet the sand because it did make it heavier. Now, I fiddled with that. Having trained in an orthopaedic hospital and being very interested in orthopaedics, I went on to one of the orthopaedic wards after I'd done my stint in Hockin and outpatients. And in those days, our hospital had broken necks and broken spines, as well as broken femurs and things like that. And as a student and as a physio in England, I had never seen a broken neck, let alone treated one. And the first patient I was introduced to was a broken neck who had some arm movement, and he was getting very near the time of coming off his head caliper traction. And he was very good. He taught me what to do with as a physio, how to do his movements, how hard to go and everything like that. And so that was very good. To begin with, when I was first introduced to him, I said, "Oh yes, good morning, how nice to meet you," etc. And then I said, I'll just give you a few passive movements, and I'll give you some breathing exercises, because when I was a student, Miss Fletcher had always said, if you ever get a patient and you don't know what to do with them, give them some breathing exercises and some passive movements and go away and look it up. Well, everybody has got some breathing, and you can always do passive movements, even if it isn't in the right place. So you don't look quite as dumb as you are at that moment. But so I learnt a lot from Brian. But in those days, fractured femurs were in a swinging Thomas for 3 months. And women with a supracondylar fracture were on a brawn splint for 3 months. And something I learnt very early on with these women, all elderly, the nurses used to complain because they were always dirty. Well, they were extremely constipated. They had a lot of pain when they had to be put on a bedpan, so they didn't go on a bedpan unless they really, really had to. So they were quite often wet, and they were dirty, but it was overflow liquid faeces. So helped to get that into a better treatment regime. They were got onto aperients regularly and that sort of thing. Don't know why the nurses didn't pick up that they had concrete in their abdomens instead of normal faeces. And then in the side room, well, not the side room, in recovery, that's where our broken necks and broken spines went, and we nearly always had at least one of both of them in on their head traction and being turned 2 hourly, which took minimum 4 people to turn a broken neck. And none of our broken necks got worse from the way we had to turn them. And it was very interesting how they didn't get pressure sores because that was well looked after. But they, having said that, they did get pressure sores, but from carelessness. I can think of one pressure sore that started because somebody scratched somebody's buttock with their diamond engagement ring. And somebody else got pressure sores on their chest because their nails were directly onto their chest with no cuddle rug in between their nails and their skin. And they got 4 crescent sores on their chest. Pressure sores they did occur, of course they occurred, but they didn't occur with the broken necks and the broken backs. They usually occurred with the fractured femurs and things, and getting them round the awful rings that they had to have up into their groins, you were not surprised. And some of the people that were lying on their backs for a long time without pressure care got very nasty pressure sores. These days you don't really get pressure sores because they're not in bed for so long, and if anything does start, then they're sent to the plastic surgeon. But a lot of those pressure sores we treated as physios with cremaya, ultraviolet cremaya, and we had, I can think of one patient, we had a special applicator made. It was a long applicator because he didn't have any sacrum really, he didn't have any buttocks. He had black flaps that poured grey pus, and we tried to do something with getting our applicator round and getting some of this awful revolting stuff out. He died. Today he wouldn't have got to that stage. The plastic surgeons would have seen him months before. And yes, I said in one of my annual reports it was a pity that the physios had to spend so much time treating pressure sores. The matron of the time never spoke to me again. She didn't like that at all. I don't want that going down. I don't want that continued.